Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Football Diary podcast. It's been yet another weekend of goals and thrills at both ends of the table and in the mediocrity of mid-table as well. We'll be discussing all that this week. I'm with Dave, starting off with Luton against Bournemouth as they grabbed a vital 3 points. Villa capitulating almost against Brentford in their fight for the top four. United somehow stealing a point against Liverpool, 2-2 at Old Trafford. And Arsenal seemingly in control now of the title race. They beat Brighton convincingly 3-0. So we'll start at Kenilworth Road, Dave, actually, first of all, which after all those headline fixtures, I'm surprised we're starting there. But in some ways I'm not, because it was a thrilling game, wasn't it, for Luton? And Bournemouth were actually battering them for the first half. They really pushed and they deserved their lead through a Tavernier goal, really good Tavernier goal. But Luton, they fought back superbly in the second half. And this win after a 10-game winless run is exactly what they needed. Do you kind of think in some ways Luton are enjoying this relegation fight when all those around them seem to be kind of struggling with it, really?
Clearly, yeah. I think there's a real unity about this squad. I think that's one thing. I mean, you look at the injuries that they've suffered, particularly over the last month or so. The players that have come in and have really contributed, and you look at the manner of the way they've actually turned around some of these games. I mean, even some of the games where they've not quite managed to complete the turnaround, like the Chelsea game where they came back from 3-0 down and gave it a real go. I think what they've shown throughout the season is that they're more than willing to throw everything, caution to the wind, and it's been a breath of fresh air. I think the way that they've actually evolved throughout the season, even after obviously this long streak without a win.
Yeah.
And to be honest, in a ways, it hasn't felt like it had been that long without a result for them, because they've performed well in some of those games, which they've not managed to get points. So you've really got to give it to them, and I think particularly in this game, it was great to see Morris get on the score sheet and obviously score the winner, because he's had a real tough time with injuries throughout this season as well. A couple of those players, I think, do you know what's going to be really tough actually come the end of the season, to pick a player of the year for them, because there's so many standout players in that squad. Obviously Mangia had a brilliant performance in this game. We talked about Ross Barkley and how he's transformed that team, and he is the man that kind of makes them tick. Alfie Doughty, and obviously Morris as well. There's been so many standout performers in that squad. It's been a great season for them so far, and they really do seem to be enjoying it.
Well, you say great season so far, but I mean, they're still very much in the relegation picture, aren't they? Obviously, with the result tonight, Forest likely losing to Tottenham is going to keep it really wide open. I think they're level on points, and just goal difference separates them as things stand. So, yeah, it's a real fight to the end, isn't it? But as you say, the way Luton have been playing, it's with a positivity that almost does kind of trick you into thinking they have been picking up points when they haven't. So I think that's the thing that makes me realise that Luton are a team that aren't to be doubted, because they can pull out performances against literally anybody. And I think, they've got Man City next, but after that, it seems like a pretty good run-in for them, from what I remember. I don't doubt they'll give Man City a game as well. And as you say, there's a few players there that are playing brilliantly at the minute. And I thought Kaminsky actually had a great game again. He's been keeping them in games too. And I think he was the key to them really staying in the game against Bournemouth this weekend. And so many players standing up and being counted. I think the only obstacle to them really is fatigue. Like Ross Barkley looked quite tired, I think, in this game at stages. And there's a few mistakes creeping in, especially in the first half. But of all of the relegation candidates, they're probably the neutrals' favourite. I don't know if that's because they're not being docked any points or anything like that. Whereas there's so much doubt over the rest of the teams. But just by the sheer force of the way they play and the way they want to win and this fighting spirit they've got, you've got to root for them in some ways, haven't you?
I think the pressure's been off them this season, though. I don't think the expectations have been too high, particularly, the team that there are. They're not. I think it's easy to say they're not one of the bigger clubs coming out of the Championship into the Premier League who know the Premier League. It's very much very new experience for them, But I think they'll feel like it's fully in their hands in a way, because I think 3 of the last games, and 2 of them massive games, one against Everton, and one against Brentford, 2 huge games for them after the Man City game. they'll feel like they can get result from in those games when they're being at home. The atmosphere it should really push them, and we've seen them, pick big results up at home this season, and I feel like they'll feel like they'll be able to do the same again.
It's strange how they came out so differently in the second half, and I think a lot of that has to be credited to Rob Edwards and just the way he does get his team working together again. I think it's just a reset to go in at half time and no changes be made and then come out and change the way they attack and approach this game. I think that's a really positive sign of a coach that knows his team really well, knows what he's doing. And out of those coaches fighting for relegation, I think he's probably the one that seems to be more in tune with what his team needs out of anyone. And his in-game team management as well has been really good too. So it isn't just about the players on the pitch, is it? The coach as well is having a good season too.
Yeah, he certainly knows how to make them tick. He knows how to get a response from them. What's evident is, not just at halftime team talks. It's on the pitch when they go behind, they respond.
Yeah.
It seems like his way of managing that team is definitely effective, and it's more than effective. I think he's definitely going to be up there with probably coach of the year if Luton stay up. He's done such a great job there. And it's going to be a fascinating end, isn't it? It's so tight at the bottom, and before you know it, I looked, a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, Brentford had, been dragged into it.
Yeah,
it could go all the way to the wire, where there's potentially 3 teams have got a possibility of staying up. In the last couple of games of the season. Let's hope it is that way. To all of our Luton watchers, hopefully you do stay up, and it's going to be one of the stories of the season, that's for sure, if they do.
You mentioned Brentford there, Dave, for a moment in the relegation fight, and I am kind of quite staggered that they aren't even being talked about as having a difficult season. Do you know what I mean? They still seem to be talked about as if they're mid-table, and they're not. But they almost pulled off a thrilling comeback win against Aston Villa, didn't they? They were 3-2 up after being 2-0 down. That spoke volumes really about what they can do and the players they've got at their disposal to get them back into the game, like Mbumo and Wisso, who, again, all played really well. But from an Aston Villa perspective, and we have a lot of Villa fans watching this channel, haven't got Miles here at the minute to kind of chip in, but I'm sure he'll be frustrated at the nature of Villa losing that 2-0 lead, because they could have killed the game off, couldn't they, in some ways? But the complacency seemed to let Brentford back in. I mean, is that a concern for Villa, do you think, chasing top 4? They've got a tough run in.
I think it's a concern defensively. What is clear is obviously the amount of injuries that they've had. It can't do the defenders in there who've had to play so many minutes any good in terms of, or let's be honest, there's been a lot of games particularly over the last month, a lot of midweek games for them, a lot of European games as well. So I think it's taken its toll, and I think what's surprising is probably in the manner of the way that they conceded 3 goals so quickly. It was such a shock, really, because the mentality that this team has shown throughout the season is they've been able to respond, and not been a team that have conceded easy goals, and I think that's the thing for me, is that they were just avoidable, particularly the third goal, the Whistle one. I don't understand how the cross manages to get in the box that easily. It should be cut out. I think Conser probably should do a little bit better there. But to be fair, obviously they came back, they scored the equaliser. That could be a vital point at the end of the season. And on the back of the rest of the results this weekend, it's probably not going to be. It's not going to be a massive couple of points dropped, but
true.
They've had the opportunity, Villa, to really kind of, drive home their advantage over Man United. Man United have dropped 7 points, from winning positions in the last 3 games, and Villa could really be out of sight, and Spurs and Villa could both be out of sight, and we could not be talking about a top 5, top 4 race. But there's still a chance, and you look at those fixtures as well that are left over. All 3 teams have got to play some tough games, and you'd probably say Spurs have probably got the toughest running. I think they've still got to play Arsenal. I think they've got to play
Well, Villa have too. They've both got to play Chelsea, Arsenal, and Liverpool
Yeah,
at some point. So they'll both have a say in the title race as well, which is
exactly.
kind of another layer of
And that's why
fascination.
you look at it, and I think there's an 11-point gap now between Spurs and United. But
Mm.
you look at that running, and you look at some of the fixtures they got. If United can put a string of results together, if Villa can put a string of results together, completely turn it around. So
You're
it's going
talking
to
about
be in it.
United like they're in the conversation there, Dave. We'll talk about them in a bit, but the gap's too great for United, surely. But I think this is, for me, a two-horse race for fourth place.
Mm.
I mean, the saying you're in fourth in the Premier League is one of them things that we've always talked about as like a goal, the top four. And whatever happens with the coefficient situation, I still think top four is the goal for both teams, both Spurs and for Villa, isn't it? And that's why, for me, it feels like a real missed opportunity for Villa this season to have done so much better. Miles has been quite clear about how many games they should have picked up points in or won the game when they've drawn it. This is one of those games, and it's really frustrating, I think, for Villa fans to see defensive lapses from reliable players like Pau Torres and Diogo Carlos, who should have known better and should have not left so many gaping gaps behind them. Having said that, I thought Brentford did well with Mbeumo, especially exploiting the space that he was gifted. And Wissa, like you said, did everything he had to do to kind of score that third goal. But once again, it was Ollie Watkins to the rescue, it felt like. And his comments at the end of the game saying that Villa didn't show a big game mentality or a big team mentality, wasn't it, to sort of kill the game off at 2-0 and make it 3. Is that a fair comment, do you think? Is that where they're at the minute?
In ways, I think Villa fans will be hoping it's a rallying call.
Mm.
And I think they'll want a response from the team because that is a worry for me. Like you can't be. It seemed like they were cruising 2-0 up, and it was just such a quick turnaround. We were talking, weren't we, at the time? It was looked 2-0. That's
Yeah.
game over. And we've seen them do it this season. They've been very professional in some of the performances that they've played. They've managed to play the game out, and it's been relatively comfortable. But this was nothing of the sort. But we've seen it with this Brentford team over the last few weeks. They've been able to fight it out. Look at the United game, absolutely battered them all game, and then they could have dropped their heads and lost that game 1-0, but they came back and got a really tough, really good equaliser, and that it just shows that there's no easy games in this league, and I just feel like perhaps Villa sort of lost their concentration a little bit in this game.
Yeah.
And it showed. I think it could, like I say, that it could be a really important point at the end of the day.
It's a very optimistic way of looking at it. I think at the minute, Villa fans won't be feeling quite so optimistic. It will feel like 2 points lost. But Villa's players that have really stood this season, obviously Watkins has been a key player. He's now, is he the outright top goal and assist creator in the
28
league?
goals and assists, I think.
That's superb, isn't it? And he's also Villa's record Premier League goal contributor. He's overtaken Dwight York, I think, for a season.
I think his XG for the season is like 18 for goals and assists as well.
Yeah.
And he's on 28. So that
Superb.
just shows he's just far outperforming what's expected of him. And let's be honest, if he's not in there for player of the season at the end of the year, if he keeps going, then I think he's the outright choice at the moment for me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the key Villa players have been himself, obviously. John McGinn, I thought, had another really good game. He's been pivotal for them, really impressive in midfield. But also Douglas Luiz has been great as well, and he'll be a big miss for them, won't he? Suspended for the foreseeable, and it's frustrating, isn't it, to keep losing players like this?
Especially against Arsenal. You want him in there. If you want a player in there against Arsenal, you got to win the midfield battle, particularly against the big teams, and the way he can affect games, not just defensively but going forward, he's going to be a massive miss for them. So that's going to be a difficult one for Villa. I think they'll go into that if they can get a point out of that game. That'd be a great result.
On balance, then, I'm going to push you here to try and commit to either Spurs or Villa to finish in the top 4. Looking at their run-ins, as we said, they're quite similar. Obviously, Villa are still in Europe, some really tough 2-legged game. Is it against Lille they've got in the next round, which is not an easy game at all. Obviously, Tottenham haven't got that distraction. So in some ways, you could say they're going to be fresher. How do you see it playing out, and which squad do you think can handle this run-in better?
They've had the problems with injuries. I think I think Spurs are probably in better shape in terms of their squad availability. I think they've probably got a slightly tougher running. Although you say they are quite similar, they both play, 2 or 3 really big games still. But I just side in with Villa. I just think Villa might potentially pick them to top 4, even though obviously they're behind at the moment. But I just think they've got that they just seem to have that clinical nature about their game at the moment. Obviously, this was a little banana skin for them this particular game, but in those attacking areas, Watkins is the man. I think he'll probably just carry them over the line. Spurs, I think, if they, like we say, the coefficient, they could both potentially end up getting into the Champions League. And let's be honest, they fully deserve it. Yeah. They've both had really good seasons. Both really good seasons, 2 new coaches, relatively new coaches to the league, and apart from Emery, obviously, but with their respective clubs, I think that it's been a relatively successful season for both teams, but I do think Villa will probably just pick them to it.
Now, not long ago in this podcast, at the very start, we were talking about the race for top 4, weren't we? And you mentioned United in that conversation, and let me remind you about last week's pod where you were saying how of the running that United have got, they had to beat Chelsea really in that first game of that running to stay in contention. And if they lost that, then they'd be out of contention. Now they lost that, and we didn't talk about that game because it was midweek. Lost it in such disappointing fashion as well with... they took the lead, they brought it back from like they always do, from looking like they were in a losing position, but lost to just poor game management. Now, this weekend they played Liverpool, another key game, and somehow came away with a 2-2 draw after an awful first half from United again. It should have been an absolute landslide for Liverpool, shouldn't it? And after Luis Diaz scored the opener, I feared the worst. I think most United fans did, really. And it was only because they weren't punished by Liverpool that they still were in contention. 28 attempts on goal Liverpool had. How the hell did United get a point out of this? What gave them that opening in the second half that kind of gave them a glimmer of hope that they could get something out of the game?
First of all, just say that 0 shots in the first half. And I think Sky Bet were offering 40-1 for them to have no shots at the end of the game. Which is a bit embarrassing, really, isn't it? It's almost like they're taking a mick out of us a little bit.
We're laughing at our own team, but it is, because we watched that game thinking this isn't really a surprise in some ways, because Liverpool have had games like this against us in previous seasons and taken full advantage and taken big leads. We've gone behind 4-5-0 at half time against them sometimes. So you do fear the worst. Wasn't the case this time, and United had an opening and they took it. That Bruno Fernandes goal was the first shot, scored from inside the centre circle as well. It was a poor mistake from Quansah, wasn't it? But that was the kind of turning point, really, wasn't it?
It was, and it was almost a light switch moment, and we've seen it happen so many times this season with United. It's almost like, and we've seen it when they go behind, they only start to show any sort of urgency, or the last 15 minutes of games when they actually seem to click into gear. It's been very much in moments, and in ways that's kind of been the story of the last 10 years, to be honest. We've shown that we can perform in certain games, we can perform in moments. We've got players who can produce that bit of class. We saw it with the second goal again. But it was a similar feeling, wasn't it, to the FA Cup game for me? I think Liverpool were out of sorts. Their front line just weren't quite clicking. I don't feel like Old Trafford is a very good happy hunting ground for them. And I think Jamie Carragher mentioned it, is they do struggle a little bit at Old Trafford, and likewise United struggle at Anfield. There's a bit of a hoodoo hanging over them. But I think in terms of this game, they just didn't make the right decisions. Liverpool in that final third, there wasn't that kind of urgency as well in their passing. Not quite that zip in their passing to create to have that cutting edge that they needed. And to be honest, they probably got a little bit fortunate with their goal, as they got given an absolute Brainless decision by Wan-Bissaka to go to ground there, and
Yeah.
obviously got the penalty. But let's talk about that Mainu goal. Honest, like,
Yeah, I mean, he's already announced himself as a key play for us, and there were some question marks about whether he could be even a squad player for England. I think the way he's been rising to occasions like this, he's got to be a starter for England, a player that would build our midfield around for United, and pressure. What pressure? Do you know what I mean? He seems to just take it all in his stride, and that goal. We were saying before we started recording this, weren't we? There were just shades of Kiko Makeda and his breakthrough goal and his first goal against Aston Villa back in the day. But obviously, a slightly different way of striking it. But the way he got that bend on it and the way where it finished in the net was beautiful, wasn't it? What a moment for him, and what a moment for Old Trafford to sort of celebrate his first goal at Old Trafford too.
definitely. And to be honest, I didn't think this was his best game. I thought the last couple of games he's looked as though he's kind of burnt out a little bit.
Tired, yeah, definitely.
Let's not forget he's only a young lad at 18 years of age, and for him to be technically carrying that midfield, progressing the ball forward, because let's be honest, he's such a unique player in the way that he plays. He's got that composure and he can beat a press. He's just got that quick way of playing the game, quick thinking. He's such a great player to watch, so easy on the eye. But I think we forget that. Look at how many gaps we have in that midfield, and how many times he has to make sprints back into position. How many times he has to make sprints back to regain possession, to make tackles, to make interceptions. It just happens too often, and I think that has affected him a little bit, and especially in these last couple of games, he's played a lot of game time, and he's not been used to.
It's almost inevitable, isn't it, in some ways, that an 18-year-old is going to sort of feel some kind of burnout. Burnout's a strong word, but just fatigue. Like, you could see the fatigue, couldn't you? And against Chelsea as well in midweek, you could see the same from him and a few players, to be fair. And the frustrating thing for me is, before we talk about what United got horribly wrong in both those games, there's so much I think that we could take away as positives, which makes the result against Chelsea especially all the more frustrating. So many players have actually been doing all right. And like you say, the midfield has really let us down because it's anonymous quite often. But look at Willie Cambuala, played brilliantly in this game, didn't he? I thought he was so mature beyond his years, in the same way that Mainu has been all season. I think Alejandro Garnacho as well deserves immense credit for the way he played against Chelsea. Every time we take him off, it feels like we're vulnerable because we've got no attacking outlet, and we're not very good at holding on to games, as we know, and we need a player like him because off the ball, he's really, really good too. Andre Onana has kept us in games. How many times in the last maybe 10, 12 games? He's been like one of those players that without him, it'd have been a landslide defeat. So why are we should be positive about some of these games and performances, but we're not. So what's letting the team down, do you think? What's the fundamental problem with Manchester United at the minute?
I think, being brutally honest, I still think there's some players in there that are probably okay to be squad players. I don't think they're good enough to be starting. And we've mentioned the names already. Obviously, I think Wan-Bissaka, he's great as a one in 1v1 situations. We saw it in this game. He actually kept Salah quite quiet at times, but on the ball, he's technically probably not up to it, in my opinion. And I think one player we've got to give a lot of credit for is probably Diogo Dalot. I thought in this game he was monstrous again. He really tied down Luis Diaz, actually bullied him at times with his physical side of his game. I think one of his underrated skills how quick he is. He's actually really quick off the mark, and I think he's gained a couple of yards actually, particularly in this last year. I thought he's been one of the most consistent players for the season, and that's just something that this team's lacked, is consistency and focus at the right moment. And if you look at in the last 3 games, they've been in winning positions and dropped 7 points.
Yeah,
we could be talking about United right in the Champions League chase if they'd have 2 of them games, obviously, that they drop points in stoppage time, which it's a mentality thing, I think, as well. I do think that we need a couple of characters in there who hold this team together. We've obviously missed Lisandro Martinez. We've missed Luke Shaw. think Luke Shaw's been a massive miss at that in that fullback position. The amount of balance that he gives is kind of going forward as well as defensively. I think it's understated.
I feel like the realization now for me isn't that it's just as simple as certain players letting the team down or anything like that. I just feel like Eric Ten Hag hasn't shown any evidence that he's coached certain things, certain fundamentals into this team. Like, for example, knowing how to see out a game, how to keep the ball when you're under pressure, how to stay calm, which we just can't do. Some players seem to just lose their heads in those moments of pressure. And I don't know if it's complacency or lack of maturity or just stubbornness or whatever, but why can't we just have a plan that's played out on the training field that is then obvious on the field as well?
Yeah,
I
but
don't think that's the case, and that really disappoints me. There are some things that are completely out of Ten Hag's hands, and I think the Chelsea game's an example of that, and I said that on Twitter as well, on X, that he was shouting to his players to keep the ball, and they just didn't, and that's frustrating. But I still don't know what a Ten Hag system is with this team of players.
I think you say that though as well, and I don't think there's actually many players in there who've actually experienced what it's like to be in a functional team, and that's crazy to say because there's some players that have been at United for, look at Marcus Rashford. He's been there
True.
since the age, since his academy days, but arguably he's not been in a team that have been a functioning team, a way of. You mentioned about keeping the ball there. We've not been that team for a long while. Well, Van Gaal, but not in an effective way. It's no good having the ball, passing it backwards and sideways for 65% possession of the game.
Under pressure, we don't keep the ball. We don't retain possession when we know we've just got to see out a minute or two.
There's players in the squad who are capable of doing it technically, like Mason Mount. You watch him; he come on against obviously Chelsea and actually played really well. He kept the ball really well in tight pressure situations, and you could just see the gap in technical ability compared to some of the other midfielders. Scott McTominay is different kind of midfielder. He's got that physical prowess. He's able to shield the ball and obviously keep the ball in that way. But in terms of passing the ball in tight areas, quick 1-2s, etc., there's not many players in this team that I don't think that have those capabilities.
Fair enough. Well, let's finish the conversation today on the top of the table. And let's just have a look how it looks quickly. And so finely poised, isn't it? Manchester City beat Crystal Palace 4-2. And I think defensively, they look really sort of sketchy, didn't they, this weekend? And I think it was a Kevin De Bruyne masterclass, really, that kind of saved them. Obviously, Liverpool dropped a couple of points against United, which leaves Arsenal top on that all-important goal difference. They had that run of games, didn't they, where they scored a ton of goals after the new year. That seems to be really, at the minute at least, the key for them in staying that little hair's breadth ahead. But a 3-0 win against a really tough Brighton team who have been really difficult to beat at home this season, I think that's a statement performance for me. Say what you like about the way Brighton have performed so far this season. At home, they've always been pretty reliable. So to comprehensively beat them like that made Arsenal, for me, look like they were on that path now towards becoming champions. And they'll be massively happy with United taking these points off Liverpool, won't they? Because it does seem like it is in their hands now, isn't it?
Oh, they've just been super efficient, haven't they, in certain games, Arsenal? I think that's been the real difference in how they've been this season. I think even the games when they've not actually performed particularly well, because I didn't think this was the best performance by any means. They got the job done. They had those deciding moments. You had certain players,
but never under threat though, and that's the thing. They've not looked under threat of conceding many goals at all since the turn of the year. That's impressive.
No, definitely so. Like we've already mentioned, Gabriel and Saliba over the last few weeks, and just how they've marshalled that defence. They've made such a huge difference to this team, and they have the mentalities that actually make Arsenal actually difficult to beat now.
Yeah.
And you saw it against City, obviously. Last week, let's be honest, there was a lot of people obviously criticising the way that they played, but it's a way that we've seen. If you look at Fergie's team, United, how amount of times they went to difficult away fixtures and just popped the bus at times to get a valuable point. It's about grinding those results out, and that's what Arsenal are doing in certain games. And the tide's definitely turned. I think
Yeah,
for me, I think they're favourites. I think they've got some difficult games. They've definitely got some difficult games coming up. They've obviously got to play Spurs. That's going to be a huge one, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Um, and that's going to have a big say on the how the top four finishes up as well, which is just makes it all more fascinating. But for me, I think I think they're the favourites. I just
Yeah,
this is the period where in previous seasons where they've dropped off, hasn't it? Last season
absolutely.
they
Yeah.
just couldn't quite make that final hurdle. But I'm sure Arsenal fans will be feeling a lot more confident this time around.
I think for me, it's that core of the team that really stands out. Like you say, they've got Saliba, who's been brilliant. Gabriel's been immense next to him. But Declan Rice obviously has made such a difference in keeping them so composed at the back. And they're having a better season, I think, than the equivalent of Manchester City. So they've got Stones, Diaz, and Rodri. And they're all brilliant and they've all played brilliantly at moments this season. But I think for consistency, that trio for Arsenal, I think that's arguably better and has been better than the same for City, don't you?
Yeah, and it's not just about the core. I mean, we've spoken about Trossard and what he's added to this team. I think when he plays, he's definitely got a different way of playing to the likes of Martinelli, who will
Yeah.
give that little bit more width and give them that little bit more pace on the outside. But Trossard is the kind of player who can play as a false nine if he needs to, but he can play as that creative inside forward, and I think he's given them a lot. It's enough. It's another different type of weaponry that I think they've probably lacked. And it's a question that we had, didn't we, at the start of this season? Are they going to have enough goals in this team? Because
Yeah.
Gabriel Jesus, let's be honest, he's not the most clinical of strikers, but they've had alternatives and about having those different kind of players that are going to offer you different avenues in games and be able to decide games.
Well, you mentioned obviously the goals being something we were questioning whether Arsenal had in them, but Kai Havertz, he's been a different player, hasn't he, this year? Since the turn of the year as well, especially. I know Arsenal have been impressive since the new year, but Havertz in particular, we questioned what his best position was, but him playing as a central focal point for this attack is proving really effective, isn't it? The amount of goals and assists he's getting this season with these players around him. And I think that's the key, isn't it? He's got the likes of Odegaard feeding him. He's got obviously so much ammunition coming his way that all he's got to do is be clinical. And that's been the case. And I think his goal in this game against Brighton was an example of everything Arsenal have been doing well going forward lately in a nutshell. You know, it started off with winning back possession in the middle of the park and a few simple passes between the defences and between the lines ends up at Havertz's feet with a goal gaping. All he's got to do is finish in it. And that, again, he's a player who's in so much confidence right now, Kai Havertz. He might be pivotal to this title conversation as well, hasn't he?
Oh, he scored some important goals this year,
Yeah,
you know, and
massive.
I think he goes under the radar a little bit, especially in terms of his defensive work. He's got a few nasty challenges in him as well, which I think we've always said that this Arsenal team lack a bit of nasty streak, but
Yeah.
they definitely showed it, particularly in the game against Man City. I think I said to you, didn't they? They had over 20 fouls in that game
Yeah.
and only came out with 2 yellow cards, which is, I think they've gained the ability from City of going under the radar and making little tactical fouls and that go unpunished. So I think he's definitely underrated in terms of defensive contribution. I think he comes back and works really hard in the centre of the park when he's needed. And I think Arteta really values that in him as well as his attacking contributions.
Well, as always in the title race, similar to every sort of race that's going on in the Premier League at the minute, so many factors are going to play a part in that. European football will be a big one too, because Arsenal obviously have got 2 massive games against Bayern Munich coming up in the next few weeks. Obviously, the first one being midweek. So that might prove to be something that could test their squad and their rotation abilities as well. But I feel for me that that's probably going to be easier for them to navigate than City in some ways, don't you?
You'd think so, the way Bayern are playing at the minute. I mean, this competition's probably all they've got to play for the last season. I think the gap between them and Leverkusen at the top of the league now seems to be getting bigger and bigger
Yeah.
with each passing weekend, and that can't do any good for their confidence. And I think Arsenal will be going into this game with a lot of confidence and thinking that they. I think that's one thing is they can't be too complacent,
Yeah.
and I think their focus is still at the end of the day. Bayern on their day can be a very good team, and let's not forget that. And they've got a certain Harry Kane who I'm sure will be full of
Yeah.
motivation to put one over them. So
Massive narrative there. But looking forward to the other side next weekend when we see more Premier League action. The big game, the standout game is Arsenal Villa, I think, on the Sunday. Not much turnaround time for them to sort of rest between games, really, there. So that could be crucial for them. And how Villa sort of set up against them might be important in deciding this title, hasn't it? So, yeah, watch this space. That'll be next weekend's pod. That's all we've got time for this week, Dave. We'll have hopefully Miles back soon. He's in the middle of a big move to London. So his setup might look very different next time we see him. If you
what
are
clubs are
wherever you,
joining? What London clubs are joining?
it's literally relocating to London, so I don't know how a Villa fan will get on down there. We'll see. Maybe we'll find out next weekend when they're playing against Arsenal. Hayne is wearing his colours loud and proud. But wherever you're listening to us, please do make sure you hit that follow button. It really helps us on audio platforms to get more traction, really, and more notice from whatever platform you're on. And likewise, we're on YouTube too. So if you're watching it on there, whatever clip you're watching, please do hit like and subscribe. That really helps the algorithm. Dave, pleasure as always, mate. Nice to talk about a United result that was actually fairly positive in the end. But generally, a wicked weekend of Premier League action. Hopefully, speak to you again next week.
Yeah, speak to you again. Pleasure, mate.
Cheers, mate.